Hey everyone, welcome back. The story of the Dauntless began in 1932 when aviation genius John Knudsen Northrop left Douglas Aircraft Company to establish his own firm. The early 1930s were a turbulent time for American aviation. The Great Depression had devastated aircraft manufacturers, military budgets were tight, and innovation often meant financial risk. Yet for John Northrop, risk was inseparable from progress. Northrop had already built a reputation as one of the most forward-thinking engineers in the United States. He believed aircraft should be light, aerodynamically clean, structurally efficient, and designed from the outset as complete systems rather than modified biplanes. With financial backing from Donald Douglas himself, Northrop founded Northrop Corporation in El Segundo, California. Although technically independent, the new company remained closely linked to Douglas Aircraft, an arrangement that would later shape the fate of one of the most important naval aircraft in history. A Navy searching for precision. In the early 1930s, the U.S. Navy was rethinking how air power could be used at sea. Traditional level bombing from high altitude had proven inaccurate against moving ships. Torpedo bombers were effective but vulnerable. The Navy needed something different. What it wanted was precision. Dive bombing offered exactly that. By attacking from a steep angle, pilots could visually track their target and release bombs with far greater accuracy than level bombers ever could. The concept had been tested experimentally, but it required an aircraft strong enough to survive high-speed dives and sudden pullouts. Northrop was convinced he could build such a machine. The birth of the BT-1. In response to a Navy requirement issued in 1934, Northrop proposed the BT-1, a radical departure from existing naval aircraft. It featured a low-wing monoplane configuration, an internal bomb bay, a stressed-skin metal structure, advanced aerodynamic concepts. For a carrier aircraft of the mid-1930s, this was revolutionary. But innovation often arrives before understanding. XBT-1, an aircraft ahead of its safety margins. The Navy accepted the prototype, designated XBT-1, and flight testing began in 1935. Almost immediately, serious problems appeared. Pilots reported severe directional instability, abrupt wing stall behavior, unpredictable handling at low speed, dangerous tendencies during carrier approaches. The aircraft's structure was strong, but its aerodynamics were unforgiving. In an era when most naval pilots had transitioned from biplanes, the XBT-1 demanded precision few possessed. Accidents followed, fatal ones. Among test pilots and fleet aviators, the aircraft developed a grim reputation. It was flyable, but only with constant attention. A single mistake during landing or maneuvering could be fatal. And yet, buried within this troubled design was a breakthrough that would shape the future. The dive brakes that changed everything. One of Northrop's most important contributions was the introduction of perforated dive brakes. Earlier dive bombers had suffered from violent buffeting during steep dives. Solid dive brakes disrupted airflow, causing instability. Northrop's solution was elegant. Drill holes through the brake surfaces, allowing controlled airflow while still generating drag. The result was unprecedented stability during near-vertical dives. This innovation worked so well that it would be retained, almost unchanged, through every subsequent version of the Dauntless. Even as the XBT-1 struggled, its dive braking system proved the concept was sound. XBT-2, redesign or death. By 1937, it was clear that the XBT-1 in its existing form could not remain in service. Northrop faced a choice: abandon the project or rebuild it entirely. The result was the XBT-2. This was not a simple upgrade, it was a comprehensive redesign.
Fully retractable landing gear replaced the dangerous fixed configuration. The wing structure was strengthened and refined. The tail surfaces were redesigned to improve stability. Aerodynamics were significantly cleaned up. Flight testing showed dramatic improvement. Pilots reported better control, safer carrier operations, and far more predictable handling. For the first time, the Navy saw real potential. But history intervened once again. Douglas takes control. In 1939, as global tensions rose and war loomed in Europe, Douglas Aircraft absorbed Northrop Corporation outright. John Northrop would soon leave the company entirely, but his aircraft would live on. The XBT-2 program was transferred to Douglas engineers, who redesignated it SBD-1. At Douglas, responsibility fell to a man whose influence on American aviation would be enormous: Edward Henry Heinemann. Heinemann's philosophy. Heinemann was not impressed by elegance for its own sake. His designs were guided by three principles: combat survivability, structural simplicity, ease of production and maintenance. Heinemann understood something many designers did not. In war, aircraft were not museum pieces. They were expendable tools operated by young men under extreme stress. Under his direction, the XBT-1 evolved rapidly into a production-ready aircraft. SBD-1, accurate but vulnerable. The first production variant, SBD-1, entered service with the U.S. Marine Corps in 1940. It retained the perforated dive brakes, the internal bomb bay, excellent dive stability, but it lacked armor protection for pilot and rear gunner, self-sealing fuel tanks, adequate defensive armament. In combat conditions, these deficiencies would be lethal. The Navy was cautious. SBD-1s were assigned primarily to training and secondary units. They were accurate bombers, but not yet war-ready. SBD-2, incremental improvement. The SBD-2 increased fuel capacity and minor refinements. Range improved, but survivability remained limited. By 1941, many naval planners viewed the Dauntless as a temporary solution, a necessary step while waiting for more modern aircraft. Ironically, that temporary aircraft would soon face the most decisive battles of the Pacific War. SBD-3, the aircraft comes of age. Everything changed with the SBD-3. For the first time, the Dauntless received armor plating for pilot and rear gunner, self-sealing fuel tanks, improved defensive machine guns, better communications equipment. These changes transformed the aircraft. It was still slow, still not elegant, still vulnerable to fighters, but it could now survive long enough to fight back. And just as importantly, it was available, reliable, and already deployed when war came. Standing on the edge of war. By late 1941, SBD-3 squadrons were embarked on board American carriers across the Pacific. Their crews were young, their training incomplete, their enemy underestimated. Within months, the Dauntless would prove that precision, discipline, and design evolution mattered more than raw speed. But that story belongs to combat.
War begins, and the Battle of Midway. Pearl Harbor, early combat, Coral Sea, and Midway. The Pacific War exploded. The dawn of December 7, 1941, changed everything. When Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy faced a staggering loss of capital ships and a sudden urgent need for combat-ready aircraft. Among the survivors were a handful of SBD Dauntless squadrons. Though the aircraft had been considered slow and vulnerable, its accuracy in dive bombing now became a strategic asset. Inexperienced crews faced the ultimate test. Would the Dauntless prove itself in combat or fade into obscurity as a relic of pre-war experimentation? First engagements, wake, and midway preparations.
The first months of 1942 saw SBDs in small-scale attacks on Japanese positions in the Central Pacific. These raids provided crucial combat experience. Pilots learned to fly in tight formations under anti-aircraft fire, execute precise dive-bombing runs, coordinate with fighter escorts, conserve fuel and bombs over long distances. Each sortie hardened the crews. Each loss revealed vulnerabilities. Yet the Dauntless survived where heavier, faster aircraft would have failed. Battle of the Coral Sea. In May 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea marked the first major carrier engagement in history. SBDs took part in attacks on Japanese carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku. The results were mixed but illuminating. SBD pilots demonstrated unprecedented precision in bombing moving ships. Despite being slower than Japanese Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, their bombs often landed with deadly accuracy. Losses were high due to the lack of early warning and fighter cover. From this battle, the Navy learned that accuracy, discipline, and tactical coordination mattered more than speed alone, a lesson that would prove decisive at Midway. Midway, the Dauntless at the apex of naval aviation. By June 1942, the Dauntless had matured. Squadrons aboard USS Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown were ready for the largest engagement of the Pacific War. The Battle of Midway was not just a clash of ships, it was a test of technology, intelligence, and nerve. Japanese carriers had been sighted, and the American plan depended on precise strike timing. Dauntless pilots flew with the knowledge that their bombs could decide the fate of the Pacific. The attack on Japanese carriers. The day of June 4, 1942, unfolded almost with cinematic precision. SBD squadrons climbed to altitude, spotting Japanese carriers with binoculars and charts. They dove from nearly vertical angles, brakes perforated, engines roaring. Pilots released bombs with deadly accuracy, striking Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. Minutes turned into history. Within the hour, Japanese naval air power had been shattered. The SBD, once considered slow and vulnerable, had delivered the decisive blow. Why the SBD succeeded? Several factors explain the Dauntless's triumph. Perforated dive brakes allowed stable dives at steep angles. Precision bombing, crews trained for exact targeting. Durable airframe, could survive flak that would destroy lighter aircraft. Tactical doctrine, strict coordination with fighter cover and timing. At Midway, each SBD carried the weight of American strategy, and it delivered. Beyond Midway, Guadalcanal and the long fight. After Midway, the SBD continued to serve in nearly every Pacific campaign. Guadalcanal, shore bombardments, night strikes, close support of Marines. Solomon Islands, daylight carrier raids, anti-ship operations. Gilbert and Marshall Islands, bombing fortified positions and airfields. The aircraft's role evolved from carrier-based surprise strikes to general-purpose naval attack aircraft, proving its versatility. Combat losses and lessons. Despite its success, the SBD was far from invincible. High losses occurred when fighter cover was insufficient. Japanese Zeros exploited its relative slowness. Pilots learned to rely on formation tactics, mutual support, and timing to survive. Every engagement refined doctrine and highlighted the need for pilot skill over pure aircraft speed. Final campaigns and legacy. Later models and operational refinements. The SBD 4, 5, and 6 incorporated minor yet meaningful upgrades, stronger engines, better radios for coordination, incremental armor improvements, adaptations for longer range and heavier bomb loads. These refinements kept the Dauntless effective even as newer aircraft like the SB-2C Helldiver entered service. The Dauntless's endgame. By late 1944, the Dauntless was slowly being replaced on frontline carriers, yet in the hands of experienced pilots, it remained a formidable tool. Anti-submarine patrols, close air support for Marines in island-hopping campaigns, precision strikes against fortified positions. Even as aircraft technology advanced, the SBD's balance of stability, accuracy, and survivability ensured its reputation as a trusted workhorse. Legacy and historical impact. The SBD Dauntless was more than metal and rivets. It represented innovation born of necessity, dive brakes, structural strength, and carrier suitability. The importance of pilot skill. Precision bombing often trumped raw speed. A decisive instrument of strategy, Midway alone shifted the Pacific War's momentum. Historians consistently rank the SBD among the most effective naval aircraft of World War II, not for glamour, but for reliability and battlefield impact. Closing reflection. From the troubled XBT-1 to the triumphant SBD-3, the Dauntless journeyed through design failures, engineering innovation, and combat trials. It became the aircraft that won a decisive naval battle, supported countless amphibious operations, and set a benchmark for carrier-based dive bombers. It is a story of vision, persistence, and ultimate vindication. And it remains a testament to what careful engineering and courageous pilots can achieve under the extreme conditions.